3, 2, 1. Okay, going to talk about paddling. Just my thoughts on, I guess. Alright, never mind. Alright. Hello, Ken Lee here. Going to talk about, just go over my thoughts and opinions on technique and paddling and just developing an efficient stroke. Okay, efficient and meaningful stroke. So something basically you can do comfortably over and over that moves a boat, that isn't hard on your body, right? That you can do over and over, so that the boat will feel good. Right? I think that's what we all want. So I'm just going to talk a bit about that. Okay, so alright, first is I think mentally the first thing you want to think about is to get away from this concept of reaching and grabbing. I know we all want to try to get this massive stroke, and you want to just get that blade out there and get a long pull. So there's a tendency to kind of do this, right? This thing where you kind of throw your whole body, your upper body forward and do this, right? And then kind of come up like that, right? So we're going to try to not do that, right? And instead not throw our weight around so much. So instead of doing this, right, we want to do this, right? So so it's just more rotation, right, and less I guess lunging, whatever, right? For all sorts of various reasons. I mean, when you're throwing a weight around and lunging around, that's a bunch of extra weight you're throwing around every single stroke that, at some point or another you got to bring back up. So, not having to do that saves you a lot of energy. Right? It also keeps the boat a lot more balanced. When you're kind of moving around all over the place, the boat will respond that way. It'll bobble around. Whereas if you just kind of twist, right, your weight's much more evenly distributed. You're not really throwing your weight back and forward. You have one side going forward, the other side going back. Keeps things real balanced and keeps you from doing a lot. Keeps you from doing extra work that you don't have to. So that's kind of the overall thing. I'll just kind of get into just kind of some of the technique aspects and the body mechanics, just kind of how things work over there. So in a nutshell, the core mechanic that you're trying to achieve is basically this right here, right? This is the meat of your stroke, right? Where you're basically from here to here. As you can see, you don't really have to move a whole lot, but the paddle going from there to there is going to be the bulk of the, where you're just going to be going over and over and over. Right, just real comfortably. That. You can go beyond that. You can go a little further behind that, depending on the situation. But you want to basically be able to have a core, repeatable, meaningful stroke that you can just do over and over. Right. Whereas if you have a tendency to lunge and do this, there's a strong tendency in the boat to get to the point where, I'm sure you've all felt it. It's just we're just kind of hammering, but there's not a whole lot of movement, right? And that's because, when you meet a little bit of resistance, when you're out like this, there's a very strong tendency, especially as you get more tired, to want to go downward because you have all this weight going forward, right? Your body naturally wants to go this way, it wants to fall in, so you want to not do that because you're just kind of dumping the weight into the canoe, right? And you can avoid that basically by, just keeping more balanced and keeping your posture and just keeping more not throwing your weight around so much. Okay, so that's the main body mechanics. So I'm just kind of go into a little bit more detail in terms of what's happening, right? So first is feet and legs. It's actually super important. You know, all the power that you put into the stroke eventually ends up in your feet and your butt. Ideally, most of it ends up in your feet. That way you're pushing the boat forward, and whatever's left, you know, you can kind of sit down, right? You don't want to have dump the weight down into your butt, because that doesn't really drive the boat, and that's actually what causes release. So your foot connection to the boat is super important. So ideally there's foot pedals, right? And you want to make sure that just give some conscious attention to your feet and leg alignment, that you're not twisted weird, or they're kind of mostly pointing forward, and your ankles are aligned and your knees are aligned. You don't have any weird twist, right? Ideally you just have both feet planted in the pedal, right? And your legs are nice and aligned, and you're really connected to the canoe, right? Your feet and butt connection, you want that to be tight. That's kind of what keeps you in the canoe and keeps you upright. You don't ever want to get into a position where you're kind of, losing balance and falling over or anywhere. Whenever you should do that, any of that energy should go straight into your feet and help keep you upright. And the paddle is going to form the other, leg to that. It's kind of like a triangle. I'll go into that later. To basically help keep your body balanced and upright in the canoe, right? This is especially important when conditions are more, turbulent, right? To be able to stay upright, because if you lose your balance, you can't really apply power with your stroke, right? I'm sure you've all noticed it, where kind of things get more iffy when the boat, when the conditions aren't as smooth, right? So, super important, feet connection, leg engagement, right? If you find that, and by the way, as I'm going through this, you're probably going to be thinking, hey, you know what, my body doesn't move that way, what do I do, right? It's a very natural thing. Nobody's going to paddle like some Tahitian paddler, when you first start, right? It requires pretty good range of motion in the body, so and that's perfectly fine. There's techniques you can do to kind of work around that, or kind of bridge the gap on the way there. For example, for your legs, it may be really hard to keep both legs planted and get a good reach, right? Maybe the kind of flexibility is not there, get a good twist, right? So for beginners, I would recommend in that case, you have 1 foot forward and 1 foot back, right? That already creates kind of a natural twist already in your body, which should make it easier to reach, right? And this is a good place to start. But it's not ideal, because if you think about it, the power that you put down, one of them is kind of going backwards into the boat, and 1 foot is forward, right? But it's perfectly fine if that's what it takes to. I just realized I'm off centered. It's perfectly fine if that's what it takes to keep you balanced in the boat and able to just get a good twist and rotation, right? So good feet placement, right? Super important, right? So moving up that kinetic chain, once you have that good foot engagement, you want to engage that with your legs and your hips, right? Super important to get your hips nice and stabilized. Basically, you want the lower half of your body to you're almost dancing a little bit with the ocean, right? You want it to be nice and connected and help keep you kind of balanced and upright. And you want your hips to be that main rotation point or hinge point, right? That's your power center of your body, right? Your butt, upper legs, and hip. That's where all the big muscles are. So you definitely want to feel the engagement there. So every stroke, you really want to, think about engaging like your legs and your butt muscles and your hips and just this whole area, right? With each stroke, right? It doesn't even take much. It's just like a little, you know, just a little. It's more, and relaxation is actually what helps you engage it. Sometimes when you're just too tense, it tends to over-engage up here. So you want to relax so that you can kind of engage the legs and the hips, and just kind of, right, get like a nice, you know, just get a nice tempo going. You know, just like a little, right? It's like a little rock, I guess, with engaging all these lower body muscles, right? And once you've got that established, right, that's when you can basically start to think about actually moving the paddle around, right? So I like to focus on, again, engaging the body properly, and we'll worry about the paddle will settle in on its own. If you move your body properly, the paddle will take care of itself. I think if you focus too much on how the paddle works, you may get your body in not so good positions that may not be good for you in the long run. Okay, so once you're kind of hinging at the hips, the main thing you want to be able to achieve is essentially kind of this like scissoring motion, right? Kind of like this, right? Like this. Right. So your feet and legs and hips are engaged, and you're basically using all your like muscles on the front here, right? Your muscles back here, right? And right, you're trying to engage all that muscle, right? All the big muscles around your spine, basically. Right? So top hand's like this, bottom hand, same thing, right? So if you're able to do that, right? Next is basically once you get your paddle in position, right? You get your top hand and your bottom hand, and you do that same thing. You basically have your stroke, okay? So this is basically kind of the meat of the mechanics that you want to be able to do over and over and over and over, right? So let's talk about the engagement of the top and bottom arms, right? So basically after you're engaging at the hips, and you know, you want that to be the kind of the focal point from which all the other muscles work. Right, so your top hand is basically kind of going to be doing this motion like this. So there's quite a bit of pushing. So it's not just a pulling thing. It's like a scissoring motion, really. That's what creates all that, right? So, for example, if I'm taking a stroke, if I only move my top arm, you can actually get quite a bit of. Right? If I'm only moving my bottom arm, right, or if I'm sitting up, right. So if you just combine all three of those, you don't really have to move a whole lot to get, you know, a meaningful stroke, right? That's right. Little top arm, little bottom arm, recovery, right? So the recovery and the stroke, I'm basically just doing this, right? There's a very strong tendency to paddle sideways. I know it helps with your reach and it helps with your stroke, but it really, really helps to paddle center, to apply pressure from the top and pulling from the bottom equally. That goes a long way in terms of just helping everything. So, and I know it'll probably take some time to get there, right? Which is why you know, we just have various techniques that you can just help bridge the gap. But that's kind of what you want to think about as the ideal end goal, right? Is that you're kind of engaging both sides equally, no matter which side you're paddling on. Right? Okay. So your top hand is kind of doing this. There's a very strong tendency to have it go down and to just keep going down, and you don't want that, right? Once you enter, pretend the water line's here, right? I have my recovery, I go down. Once you're in here, you're not going down anymore. You're scissoring, right? once you're in the water, you want to go basically front to back for the most part, right? So I think the key to achieving that is to not is to be patient and to not run away from the pressure that you feel, and to actually just go through with the pressure. It's kind of like, you know, when you got like a real hard piece of poo, it's real stubborn. The best way to get it out isn't to like force it, it's to just put gentle pressure on it and relax, and then it just kind of comes out. So it's kind of like that. So the top, okay, back to the mechanics of the top arm. So, good shoulder flexibility really helps here, right? Basically being able to, right, basically move your shoulder like this, right? Because you want to be able to, right, I think at the initial engagement point, right, in the water, like this, you're actually engaging more of the front. But then when you're following through, right, you're engaging like whatever this muscle is here, this your armpit muscle. So you want to really try to engage all of that with each stroke. And with your bottom arm or bottom hand, you want to engage, right, I guess this down here. I don't know what muscle that is, but with the big one that basically pulls this way, right? You want to do that. Right. So, and as you move further up, the hand placement is actually pretty important as well. It's not really talked about. Sometimes you keep pushing and you push in a scrunched position like this, or sideways like this. So really try to keep your hand kind of straight as throughout the stroke. So which involves a little bit of wrist rotation, right? Like even as I'm, right? So as I'm traveling this way through the stroke, I'm trying to keep my right hand like forward, that right, that keeps the paddle straight and directly against the pressure, which is what you want. You want to engage as much pressure as you can and follow through your stroke patiently while engaging and kind of chasing that pressure. Right? So your top hand goes like this, right? And it goes like this. And when you recover, it's just rotating your torso like this. Right? So take your stroke, recover, you're twisting your wrist, right? And then you're just bringing your top arm kind of shoulder and just doing this. So you don't need a whole lot of movement, right? But it's all about rotating as much of your muscles and meat as possible on top of your hips and centered around your spine. And on the bottom hand, again, wrist rotation definitely is helpful. If I'm taking a stroke, notice my wrist is like this. You may not have that wrist flexibility yet, in which case it's totally okay to just kind of engage maybe the pinky first like this, and then kind of close it like that, just to help you out a bit. But ideally, you want all your fingers engaged. It really helps the engagement of all the muscles in your arms if you do that. When you pull, you want to pull all the muscles here, all your fingers here, and when you push, you want to push like with all of your hand here. It helps engage all the muscles here. So try to not push from one side of the hand or the other. Right? Now, you may not be able to keep your wrist that way, right? Like it doesn't have the flexibility, or like you don't have the range of motion to keep your wrist straight the whole way. It's okay to do like a kind of like a twist motion like this, right? That'll help bring the top hand back a bit more, right? So if I don't have that much reach, for example, if I were to bring this wrist back and I were to open up my hand, that'll give me a lot of reach just by doing that, and you know, and using that as part of my stroke. That's okay, right? Just, you know, be aware of it and try to, you know, try to gradually improve on that to the point where you're kind of able to keep things more aligned and not have to, and keep the, you know, engaging your hands fully without having to make compromises. Additionally, you may not be able to keep your arms all that straight. You know, if you lack range of motion here, there's a tendency to use more the muscles up here, right? So we're trying to get away from doing that and use more of the muscles down here. So one thing that may help is simply to bend your top arm a bit more, right? And so I'm like this, and when I'm coming my recovery, I just bend my top arm a little bit. I get a lot more, right? And that's okay, right? Just don't force it too much, meaning don't bend it so far back that you're kind of straining yourself. Ultimately, what you're trying to achieve is to be able to kind of keep your shoulders kind of down and not like this, right? So bend your arm if you need to. Just do this, right? Just to be able to get that meaningful stroke that you can do over and over. Right? The lunging forward thing is basically going to work against you a couple of minutes into the paddle. We'll start to get tired, right? Our you know, the length of that stroke is gone. So power is really not important. What's really more important is that people take a meaningful stroke together. Meaning, if literally we just did this, but we did it together, the boat will actually move pretty fast. You don't need much power at all. Okay. And in terms of the overall, I think trajectory, like of the hands. So I think as a general guide, remembering to keep things centered and balanced will help you along here. And this, what I'm talking about is, you know, sometimes we're told to, like, you know, stack our hands, right? And sometimes that'll work against you. You know, if you're so focused on stacking your hands, you might end up doing this, which I see quite a bit. Which, you know, if you're basically doing this the whole time, it's not going to be good for you, right? So I think it's more important. You know, ideally, what you want is your top hand to kind of be able to have the power basically go down the center line and just kind of whatever angle it takes to get through the gunnel, right? You want to have that, right? You don't want it to be fully vertical, right? I mean, it helps to apply top pressure, but if it's fully vertical, sometimes it prevents you from engaging both sides of the body, which is what you want, right? So you want to be able to. You don't want to be so stacked that it's so compact that you're losing torque, right? You should be open enough that you have good reach, but there's still good like torque with your twist. Right? And ideally, I think your top hand will come down the center line, and you know your bottom hand will just basically be along the gunnel here. Right? So right side like this, left side like this, right? Keeping things centered. Now, when you do your recovery, one thing that I see a lot is this thing, right? This is what happens if you paddle basically not centered. You lift your paddle like this to try to get it out of the water, right? And just kind of like this the whole time, and you know, it's definitely going to wear you out because you're using all those small muscles here, and you're not going to have much power over here. So instead of doing this, right? Right, so you take your stroke like this. On your recovery, right, go back this way. You're really not going back that way, but you're really doing it centered. Right? You don't want this, instead you want this. Right? Right. You notice the blade is parallel to the water, Right? This allows you to basically just kind of slice through whatever is happening, wind, water, whatever the case may be. Right? And then all you do is just do this. Right? Do this here, and your blade's in the water. Right? You're ready for your stroke. Okay. Right. You want the catch and the stroke. I like to think of the catch and the stroke as one motion. I know some people or a lot of people like to think about it as kind of two separate phases where you get your blade fully in the water and then you pull. I feel that when you think about it mentally that way, it creates this thing in the boat where you want to do this, whereas the feeling and the motion you want is this. Right. So what's happening here is, if you look, let's say the water line's right here, right? When you recover, you actually already have forward momentum, because you want the energy of your stroke to be applied gradually. It's light at the beginning, and as you're untwisting your body, right, and you're getting closer and closer, everything's getting closer together, that's when you have maximum torque, right here. And this is the point where you want to almost feel like it feels like you're jumping forward. So you already have kind of this forward momentum, right? And when you have that, you already have this forward momentum, and so it feels light when you're recovering. It's kind of like you just took a hop. That's when you're recovering, right? So you take this hop, and you're recovering, right? Doing the twisting, you're untwisting, you're twisting, you're centered, right? Bam, I'm just above the water line. Now this motion right here, right? This is the catch. It's just the beginning of the stroke, right? And as that's happening, you'll notice, like, as it's entering the water from here to here, there's actually a lifting motion, which is what you want. And this is where I feel you really want to feel the top hand engagement, especially during this phase, because that's what it really helps center the boat. You're pushing against the water with your top hand, and it's kind of like it's pushing your torso into the boat, right? And it really kind of helps you stay centered. This is especially in conditions where it's moving around a lot, because then you're basically using the pressure of the stroke to stay upright and centered in the boat. And then when you're hopping, you have that forward momentum, so you're still stable. It's kind of like how a bike is more stable when you're pedaling, versus when you're trying to go slow, it's not as stable. So and the way you achieve a clean entry with that is to really just be gentle. It's like from gentle and light to heavy at the end. So it's like gentle, you got your entry here, right? It's basically entering. And at this point, you're in the water, and it's heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. Boom, stroke's over, right? So the way the paddle's going to look in the water is going to go kind of something like this, right? It's not this thing where it goes like that in the water. It actually rotates in the water as you go, right? So, right. This is the catch or the entry, right? Right. Now I'm in. Right. The stroke's basically over at this point, right? And I have forward momentum. Stroke's over. Right. That's basically it. I'm sure that was a lot, but I hope that was helpful. Any questions, feel free to ask. Good.